So where do all the lessons at the Lessons Learned Center live? Where's the button? I want to know all the answers to all the problems in the world of wildland fire. Where do I get them?
Yeah, there's a Rolodex.
A Rolodex? I bet a few of you are going to have to Google what a Rolodex is. Don't do that yet, though, because you're listening now to the Wildland Fire Lessons Learned Center podcast. The guy who knows where the Rolodex is, well, that's Travis Dotson. He's the analyst at the Wildland Fire Lessons Learned Center. My name is Alex Victora. I am the field operations specialist here at the Wildland Fire Lessons Learned Center in Tucson, Arizona. Back to that Rolodex. Who has the Rolodex?
I think we misplaced it. I don't know. That's the problem. They're not the way that this whole thing has been set up. Everybody's read a report, and at the end of the report is the lessons. So and those lessons, you have to have the context of that particular event to have the lessons. So, yeah, I don't know. That's a hard thing. It's ridiculous that we can't say the lessons are here.
Sure.
And push a button. You can't go to our website and push the lessons button and find them.
Yeah.
And even if we could, I don't know, how would that work?
Yeah.
Like, say you're running a crew.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, hey, I'm going to find something from the Lessons Learned Center.
Mm-hmm.
A lesson.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to implement it.
Mm-hmm.
How does that work?
Yeah. Well, for certain things it works well, right? I mean, if I want to figure out the right way to tune a steel chainsaw, for example, there's tools and tips and protocols out there, and I can say that if I put a tack on the saw, that it should not run more than 13,500 RPM or 14,000, whatever the number is, and that 15,000 would be bad. So there's a right and a wrong answer there, right?
That is what we call a clock.
Sure. Oh, let's talk about clocks and clouds. Yeah, lay it down. What is that?
It's a view of the world put forth by a famous old dead guy.
Mm-hmm.
This guy's name happens to be Karl Popper, and he was a philosopher. And anyway, he talked about the clocks and clouds, and that the world can be divided into clocks and clouds. A clock being easily broken down, like you can literally envision a picture of a clock in all its pieces, right? There's a little gear and there's a spring, and and you can diagram it all out, which is perfect, because if one of those springs fails or a gear has a rounded tooth or something like that, and the clock's not working right, you can break it down, find the broken piece, replace it, and it's back functioning. Just
voila.
Like chainsaw.
Right.
Chainsaw's a clock.
Mm-hmm.
If it's not operating properly, you can take it apart and find out why.
Right. Clouds,
on the other hand, trying to articulate why a cloud formed. It's like, well, there was this moisture coming in, and the sun was at this level, and there was a mountain range here and a body of water that influenced it. And the only way you can actually describe the formation of a cloud is by describing the conditions that created it, right? You can say there's a mountain here, a body of water here, some sun rays here, but you can't actually say, you can't even recreate it. You can't say exactly the thing that made the cloud that created the lightning. And so looking at the world as either clocks or clouds, most incidents or accidents that we review are clouds. They're not clocks.
Yeah, but there's elements of clocks out there, right?
For sure, clocks exist. I mean, if there was some sort of mechanical failure, or the drive shaft snapped while you're driving.
Sure. Right.
That's a clock in terms of the vehicle. Mm-hmm. Now, what happened after that and how an emergency response was carried out, that's a cloud, man. There's so many. I like to say, if there's a human involved, there's a cloud involved.
Right. Yeah.
even if most of it's a clock. Anyway, yeah, that's what makes it difficult. The lessons are so based on context, and they're not always concrete.
Mm-hmm.
They're not. It's not always the tack and the tuning screwdriver and all of that stuff.
Right. Yeah. So what do we do with that? If I'm a crew boss out there in the field, what the heck, man? We need to work harder here at the Lessons Learned Center to find those things, or where does that leave us?
I don't know. We struggle to even define what a lesson is. What is a lesson? I mean, we get reports that say, what, I don't know. What's your favorite?
Yeah. Example of a lesson that isn't really an actionable item. I don't know. There's plenty of them.
Maintain your situational awareness.
Yeah. Let's start there. What are we actually saying when we even say that? That there's an implication that you either are aware situationally, or you're aware of your situation, or you're not. It's a binary thing. It's either on or off.
Your awareness is a clock.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah, it doesn't work that way. Mm-hmm. But we still see it in reports, and we see things like that all the time. We see, expect the unexpected. That's another of my favorites.
Yeah.
And it's listed under lessons, or worse yet, lessons learned.
Mm-hmm. As though it's come and go and it's done. Yeah.
And because they wrote it down and put it on the internet and somebody else read it, it's now going to be enacted faithfully by everybody.
Sure.
But there's other things where it's like, no, we can distill it down to something really useful.
Mm-hmm.
Something we see all the time is practice emergency situations.
Right.
Anybody that's ever been in an emergency situation says, oh, you need to practice this. They either say, I wish I would have practiced it more, or I'm really glad that I practiced it.
Right.
Because then I did it.
Yeah.
That's pretty actionable.
Yeah. What's the example you think of when you think of practicing an emergency situation?
Oh, every instance that we get where people say, it was so crazy because we had just done our emergency training the week before. Mm-hmm. And we practiced all this, and it didn't go exactly the same, but I wasn't as nervous, or the opposite end of that, where somebody says, I didn't know where the emergency protocol was in my IRPG, and I was flipping through it trying to find it, whereas the people that practiced it knew that it was
right at the end of the IRPG. Boom, open up the back cover, and there you go. There's your 9-line, your medical incident report.
But I don't know how to there's a lesson. Mm-hmm. Know what page in your IRPG the medical incident report is on. That's pretty concrete.
Right. Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that it's enacted.
Right. Yeah. And it doesn't mean it's going to be the solution to the medical problem. It's one solution in a whole suite of problems you're going to deal with if you have.
Plus, that lesson is buried on page 38 of how many different reports.
Right.
It's not like you can just go to the and without context, it's almost meaningless.
Right.
I can go to second-year firefighter and tell them that, and they can just look at me and say, "Whatever, random old dude."
Right.
Not even old.
just random, completely random. Yeah. Yeah. So what then is the message here about clouds? Is there one? I mean, what are we trying to say here? The world is complex, and complexity is complex. I mean, I swim around in that, and I don't know what the heck to do with all
because that's helpful.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, these things are complex. Okay, good deal. I still have to go to work tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
I've got to go to work out there on Division Delta, and we're going to go take whatever action we're going to take on this fire. Maybe it's protecting structures, maybe it's burning out, maybe it's monitoring and point protection type stuff. But I'm going to walk out there in the woods with 1 or 50 or 1,000 people, and we're going to go to work. So, where does that leave us? What do we do with all that? I don't know.
And I was thinking about traditionally how have we done that? There's always, maybe there's not always, but oftentimes there's somebody that has done something similar to it before. There's a resident expert, and so they're the lessons learned center on that division. You know what I mean? There's always, maybe I just hope for somebody that's like, oh man, they're dialed on structure protection, and we kind of just, defer. Uh-oh. Using some HRO words, deference to expertise. Oh man, it's on tape too. Travis Dotson.
Okay, time out. Travis just used the 3 letters HRO and kind of chuckled about it. That's a long story. But in the meantime, what is an HRO? Let's figure it out. Okay, Google, what is an HRO?
A health reimbursement arrangement,
No.
to as a health reimbursement account.
Okay, do that Google search yourself. Google HRO. What you'll find is an HRO is a high reliability organization or a highly reliable organization. You might find both. And HROs do a few things. Among them is deference to expertise. HROs find sources of expertise. Find the experts. They're out there. All right, back to Travis.
We are actually fairly good about deferring to the person that either has the best skill set, and that's what we should be, right? We should be some, that ideally, I'd like to think that somebody could say, hey, we need some lessons, and they're thinking that way instead of just making it up. Hey, I bet you there's somebody that's done this before, and maybe there's some material out there that we could use.
Right. And it seems to me that if we're going to get to that place where you recognize that you're not the expert, or you're out of your, you're out of your realm, you're out of your area of expertise, whatever, there seems to me there's a couple things that are required. One is the humility to accept that and to recognize that, hey, I don't actually have all the answers here. And 2 is the ability and the willingness to reach out to somebody else, who might be levels under you. As a division supervisor, there might be a crew boss, or heck, even a squad leader out there who's, gotten, a perspective. How do you do that? How do you be humble, and how do you, how do you find that the source of the lesson or the expertise?
The humility part, I would argue that the younger generation is way better at that. That's what Google is. I don't know. Google it.
Yeah.
That's a form, right? That's a form of humility. That's a form of, a lot of people will say, oh no, that makes people not be able to remember phone numbers, and, and it dulls your senses or all that stuff. But it is a form of admitting that you don't know.
Sure.
Or laziness. Maybe that's what people call it. Oh yeah, that's laziness.
Right. Yeah. Kids these days. Yeah.
Yeah. But then also having the expectation that the answer is out there.
Mm-hmm.
Let's not reinvent the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
And that approach in what you're describing is helpful. Believing that the answer is out there and putting forth the effort to find it, or maybe not the answer, but maybe some advice.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, again, a lot of theory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I don't know what the ideal process is for something bad happens, something that we just believe there is lessons, and then boiling that down all the way. Somebody does a whole bunch of things, either writes a report or makes a video or something, and eventually then here we are on the podcast, and we say, okay, this thing happened, here's the lesson. Can you think of an instance where we could do that? I'm sure they exist.
Yeah.
Roll your sleeves down. That makes sense, but how come we can't do it?
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, so that was the first part of this discussion, lessons. And there's a lot going on there, obviously. Clocks and clouds, those are kind of cool concepts. Some of that HRO stuff you might find is pretty cool too. Google it. Now, for the second part of this conversation, what we want to do is talk about data. This thing that we talk about, which is data. Let's talk about data here, because that's the other part of the data lessons kind of conversation.
Sure. Like reporting, if it's the same lesson over and over again, or what's the benefit in reporting it? And from my chair, the data sometimes is what leads to a revelation of some sort. Like, I was astounded when I started looking into it, how often we roll water tenders. It was just never something that I paid attention to, because I'm not a water tender operator. I've never, I've seen them a lot, but it was just never something that was in my, it didn't matter to me.
Right.
Water tenders really didn't matter to me for the most part operationally, just because they were there or they weren't.
Right.
And when I started looking in my job as an analyst, and I started just counting up stuff because somebody asked about rollovers, and I saw how often water tenders roll over and how often they end up in fatalities, and then being out as a task force leader or a division supervisor and having a water tender assigned to my division that I'm responsible for, and having that knowledge of how often we tip them over. Holy crap, I all of a sudden operated differently just because I knew that. And the only reason I knew that is because somebody had counted them all up.
Right. There was data, not necessarily one specific lesson that said, hey, think about tenders X or Y.
So there wasn't, it's if one report got in my hands and it said, hey, this water tender tipped over on a, windy dirt road, and they had some lessons in there, I'd seen those reports and it didn't mean anything to me. But all of a sudden, when I saw the numbers, for some reason that changed things for me.
Yep.
And I'm in a unique position because of this. But sometimes when you put that graph up there in a classroom, then sometimes people go, oh, they connect it. The numbers, for some reason, connect it to their day-to-day operations.
Right.
So the data isn't a lesson in itself, but it can sometimes be used to trigger a change in behavior.
Sure.
Or to reinforce a lesson.
Right.
About.
Right.
I don't know. Maybe who knows what the lesson is about that? I don't send tenders down steep grades loaded.
Right.
I have them scout ahead of time. That type of stuff.
Sure. The one that I think of when I think of data or establishing that something is a real issue is this notion, or this thing we call can't talk to Medivac, which is something we see and are continuing to see. And there's a number of reasons. It would be nice if that was a clock and we had one specific reason why we can't get these non-contracted life flight type helicopters up on the radio. There's a lot of reasons why that's the case. A couple of years ago, I was at a helibase, and I remember having a conversation with somebody who said, well, that's not an issue. That's not really an issue. And it's like, well, actually it is. It happens over and over and over and over again. And the lesson then becomes, something that unfortunately is not operationally actionable. It needs to be pre-operationally engaged. Hey, as an incident emerges, or even before there is an incident on a unit, those conversations need to take place with the potential Medivac providers. Here's where our radios can and can't go. Our operators, our pilots can or cannot reprogram in flight, etc. Here's our frequencies. We get together, we say, okay, we'll meet you there. We'll come to you, or you come to us, or whatever. And there's little glimmers of hope out there that we can fix that issue.
Driven by data.
Right, exactly. And driven by this repeatedly we see that.
Because how many times have we said, just like you're saying, people saying, no, that's not a problem.
Right.
Or that shouldn't be a problem. Okay, it shouldn't, but it is.
Right, exactly.
Because we have this many instances of of somebody with, proverbial blood on their hands, or actual blood on their hands, keying the mic and not getting anything back.
Right.
And I would argue that there is an operational lesson there, which is have a backup. Plan on, why not plan on not being able to talk to them?
Right.
It'd be nice if your primary works, but what's your alternate and your contingency and, your emergent, all of that stuff. And some people in some of those reports said, if you have life flight coming and you don't have air attack, order air attack too.
There you go. Yeah.
Just for that.
Right.
Just to be so that they can talk to them on Victor.
Right. Exactly. And there's that lesson is for sure out there that we might not be able to get them on the FM, air to ground type frequency, but you're exactly right. Yeah. Air to air. And then there's some awkward relays and stuff, but it's better than nothing. So, and lots of reports point to those lessons or that data and contribute to that data that we're talking about. So we talk about lessons, we talk about data. What, kind of ironically, what's the lesson here? How do we sum this up? Can we?
The easy thing would be like that, and that's why it's important to report things. I guess contributing to a greater good further down the road that you might not. Sometimes it's not the lesson. That's not the light bulb thing. It's actually just the one in the column.
Yeah.
Just saying, hey, this happened.
Right.
ATV loading. It might not seem like that big of a deal, but how often is does it result in some sort of super bad deal,
right?
Or even a close call?
Sure. Yep.
And that awareness again of especially things that seem innocuous or seem kind of
routine.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
How often that isn't the case.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
So that's message one is report. It might not be the lesson. It might be the contribution to the data set that can be really, really valuable. What else? Anything else? What's the message to folks out there with regard to consuming this stuff and reading reports and looking at videos and listen to us yammer on here? What kind of ownership or onus do we put on folks out there in the field to engage with this stuff? Anything there?
Well, I guess the relevance is a two-way street. We have a responsibility to be producing relevant stuff, but part of how that comes across, how we're able to do that is either through feedback or interaction. You know what I mean? People telling us, "Hey, that podcast was worthless, and here's what would be worthwhile." Feedback, two-way street. Make our stuff relevant.
Right.
Or help us make it relevant to what it is that folks need out there.
Well, with that last comment, thanks a bunch, Travis. Great stuff there. And as far as relevancy goes, help us make these things relevant. We want to hear from you. If you're listening to this podcast, leave us a comment in any of the platforms where it's available. We're in iTunes now. If you're an iTunes user, find the Wildland Fire Lessons Learned Center podcast in iTunes. Just do a search for Wildland Fire Lessons Learned Center in the iTunes store. Find us on Podbean, the Podbean app, which you can download to your phone. Check us out, Wildland Fire Lessons Learned Center and the Podbean app. Otherwise, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, at wildfirelessons.net. And we're in YouTube as well. Just do a search for Wildland Fire Lessons Learned Center in the YouTube platform and check us out there as well. Until next time, this has been Alex Victoria and Travis Dotson from the Wildland Fire Lessons Learned Center in beautiful Tucson, Arizona. Check us out next time. And thanks a ton for your time. I've said it like a few times now. Mic stand I can't be kicking it. It's just don't kick the mic stand. Don't do it, okay? Not cool.